We live in the best possible world. It could be no other way. God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-benevolent. He could have chosen not to make a better world. At least that's the kind of argument that Leibniz would make you think. And to this day, this is the kind of argument that, even outside of philosophy, gets a good amount of mockery. How could someone think such a thing? You go out in the world, you see lots of evil, lots of bad things in the world, and you think, all good God couldn't allow all of this. And so we confront the thing we call the problem of evil. And so we have someone like Leibniz, a historical German philosopher, who thinks, no, we do live in the best possible world. He goes against this intuition we have, that for some reason, God allows there to be evil in the world. He takes it a step further than even just saying that. He tells us that in his view, God could not have made anything but the best. At least that's what I'm going to cover in more detail today as we move forward, and then give a little twist to it. I think instead of responding to Leibniz with mockery, I think we should actually be, in a way, afraid that he's correct about this, but for reasons he doesn't say. So let's jump right in. So as I already said, Leibniz is mocked for this argument very famously, very openly, and consistently to this day. Figures as old as Voltaire make fun of Leibniz for holding this really crass and optimistic view of the world. Right? It's too strong. It's too strong of a claim. It doesn't make sense. Right. So let's just first cover some background on Leibniz before we look at Leibniz's own view, and then give some analysis. All right. So first, Leibniz is born in Leipzig in 1646. He is the son of another professor of philosophy. His father dies when he's young. Right? But even with his father dying, in a way, there's a positive thing that comes out of it. Leibniz inherits this great philosophical library of a professor of philosophy. In a way, Leibniz inherits philosophy. Right? And so he goes on his early path. Before he even turns 20, completes his dissertation and habilitation in philosophy, and begins a life of an academic, an independent academic. He ends up working secretarial jobs, diplomatic jobs, without his wife, primarily serving the houses of Hanover and Brunswick within the Holy Roman Empire. Interesting historical note about this is that the House of Hanover actually connects to the British monarchy, and I actually think this is part of the reason Leibniz has such influence in the English-speaking world. That's more historical conjecture than anything else, but I think it's interesting to flag. Let's move forward, though. Right, so Leibniz spends his life as this really well-esteemed secretary working for the Holy Roman government, parts of the Holy Roman government more precisely, and gets to engage with a lot of the high academics of his time. He gets a lot of independent time, writes letters, lots of correspondence with other intellectuals of his time. And this culminates in his 1710 text, Theodicy, and that's the text I want to focus on today. Right. The Theodicy, or a Theodicy, is actually a term he himself coined for this endeavor. Basically, it translates this idea of the justification of the divine. That is, why is God like how God is? If we more literally translate Theodicy, we could also translate it as the justice of God. It's ambiguous in terms of how we translate it. Nowadays, we would just say Theodicy itself, but he coins this term for his endeavor. He's 60 at this point. He's much older than he was when he was an academically ambitious youth, right? Again, he gets his dissertation habilitation before he's even 20, but then takes 40 years to write this particular book. And it's the only major text he publishes in his entire lifetime. He publishes much correspondence, he publishes some minor works, but this is really his primary claim to fame and the main philosophical influence that he projects to this day. Before we turn to analyzing the Theodicy, we have to cover two basic background suppositions. Leibniz believes, firstly, in the absolute benevolence of God. It could be no other way. He takes this as definitional of God. The Christian view of what God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all good, all benevolent, right? Omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent. Secondly, Leibniz is a good rationalist philosopher. Now, that might not mean much without specifying what the jargon means here, but for our purposes today, one's particular view is most important. The principle of sufficient reason. Leibniz believes that everything that is in the world, everything that comes about in the world, must have had something that sufficiently caused it to be. Breaking down that more, it's a view in which everything in the world has to be caused by something that is enough to bring it about. So when a pool ball hits another pool ball, that's why the pool ball moved in the first place. The first pool ball only moved because someone struck it. Someone only struck it because they had the intention to play a game. They only had the intention to play a game because they were a rational agent brought into the world, yada, yada, yada. Go back all you can. Everything has a reason to it. And we see how that connects to the prior point that we've already discussed. If everything has a reason, there has to be a reason, particularly for evil in the world. But this clashes with Leibniz's view on the omnibenevolence of God. This is very clearly a problem for all Christians, not even just all Christians, all religious people in general, right? If we believe God is all good and God is all powerful, why is there evil in the world? Why doesn't God just eliminate the evil? That's the problem. So this problem of evil is a really famous problem. It's actually called precisely that, the problem of evil. And it's a very serious philosophical problem, especially for people who are themselves theists. And it's not like Leibniz is unaware of the problem. Yes, he comes from a privileged background, but he also comes out of the context of the 30 Years' War, an incredibly violent religious conflict that claimed approximately millions of lives. I actually don't have the precise millions, so you have to look that up. Incredibly violent conflict, though. Wipes out massive portions of the European population. And it's a religiously charged conflict, too. Protestants versus Catholics. So it's not like Leibniz was unaware of this as a theological problem. And he was definitely aware of this as just like a sociological fact that there's bad things in the world. So how does he get this metaphysical optimism that he expresses later? All right. Let's motivate this a little bit more before moving forward. Even today, we have a lot of evil in the world. Not just human-caused evil, but also natural evil, which would count under the problem of evil here. Think of the great famines of history. The Black Death, for example. The Black Death alone claimed 1/3 of Europe's population. If we look at all the diseases that were spread to the indigenous populations in America, both intentionally and unintentionally, those diseases probably wiped out a majority of the population of the Americas. Again, there's a lot of intentional disease spreading, and I'm not going to weigh in on that here. I just take that as a fact. The Spanish flu is another example, more contemporary example. In the early 20th century, the Spanish flu alone wiped out about 1/3 of everyone. Checking my notes on that. Over 50 million people in less than 2 years' time. Another contemporary example is the AIDS crisis is estimated to have claimed about 33 million lives alone. Right? These are all natural. These are all diseases. We haven't even talked about things like genocide. If we talk about, say, the Holocaust alone wiped out 1 in every 2 out of 3 Jews living in Europe at the time. The Rwandan genocide slayed an entire majority of ethnicity, the Tutsis in Rwanda. The Great Chinese Famine, following the Communist Revolution, claimed over 50 million lives alone. So between plagues and famines, and nowadays genocides, it's almost impossible to think that we live, to quote Leibniz, in the best of all possible worlds. And again, this was not unknown to Leibniz. Yes, he couldn't anticipate the future, but he was born in a time of conflict in Europe. So what gives? Let's read from Leibniz directly. Here I'm going to read from section 195 of Theodicy. God, in truth, knows no other judge that can compel him to give what may turn to evil. He's not like Jupiter who fears the six, a Greek mythology reference. But his wisdom is the greatest judge that he can find. There's no appeal from his judgments. They are the decrees of destiny. The eternal verities, objects of his wisdom, are more inviolable than the Styx. That is the river Styx, this river of death, more or less. The endless flow of the Styx. Right? God is more than determined in that great mystical flow. These laws in this judge do not constrain. They are stronger, for they persuade. Wisdom only shows God the best possible exercise of his goodness. After that, the evil that occurs is the inevitable result of the best. That is Leibniz here, will add something stronger. To permit evil as God permits it is the greatest goodness. End quote. This is a really sharp expression of Leibniz's core view, that we do live in the best possible world, and the explanation of evil in the world is a consequence of the best possible arrangement of all things. This is the kind of view that, as I mentioned early on in this video, it gets a lot of satirization, it gets a lot of flack. Voltaire most famously satirizes Leibniz's view in Voltaire's seminal play Candide. This was published a generation later, 1749. And you have mainly 2 characters of interest here. You have the titular character Candide, and you have his tutor, Pangloss. And Pangloss, to be simple, is Leibniz. Pangloss is this really great, sophisticated professor of philosophy who proves indefinitely, that's not the right word, indisputably is a good word, that we live in the best of all possible worlds. Right? And so the story goes along. You can go read it or you can go watch an adaptation of it. Things get bad. Everything just falls apart for these characters. And throughout the story, Pangloss still reasserts this great optimism. Oh, well, we're all suffering, but we still live in the best possible world. In the later written opera, lyrics primarily by Richard Wilbur, but most famous because it's a Bernstein opera, Pangloss is vividly illustrated earlier on, so here I'm going to quote from that opera version of Candide. Here I'm quoting the character Pangloss. War. Though war may seem a bloody curse, it is a blessing in reverse. When cannon roar, both rich and poor by dangers are united. Philosophers made evident the point that I have cited. 'Tis war makes equal, as it were, the noble and the commoner. Thus war improves relations. Right, a funny take on Leibniz's position, and a good example of the kind of scrutiny that Leibniz's view falls into early on after his publication of the Theodicy. Even Pangloss's very name in that story is a joke. Pan, all things. Gloss, as in shiny. Pangloss, and Leibniz by accusation, sees the world with a gloss on it. Right, the accusation there is that someone like Leibniz looks at a great tragedy, like the Black Plague, and he sees a shine to it. There must be some reason this evil occurred. That's not to say Voltaire is some kind of metaphysical pessimist. No, Voltaire's own story ends with the characters kind of just going and living on a farm and living a simple life. Right, Voltaire gives an optimistic note that a good life is possible. But Voltaire is particularly making fun of Pangloss's view, that everything in the world is for a good reason. This just strikes quite sharply against what we could call common sense. Like, there'd be no reason to think, for example, that earthquakes somehow produce great good in the world in some indefinite and distant way. Let's continue along. Unlike Leibniz's time, an additional horror, we have become death, destroyer of worlds. The first nuclear weapon detonated in Los Alamos on July 16th, 1950. Sorry, messed that date up. Unlike Leibniz's time, an additional horror, we have become death, destroyer of worlds. The first nuclear weapon was detonated in Los Alamos on July 16th, 1945 at 5:29 a.m. Similar weapons will later be used twice in warfare, Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. A few years later, 1952, well after the Second World War was finished, the first hydrogen bomb was detonated. It ablated the entire island it was tested over. If one deployed that specific bomb, IV Mike, on New York City today, those 10.4 megatons of explosive force would instantaneously obliterate over 3 million people. Third-degree burns would extend all the way to Yonkers, some 16 miles away. The Soviets countered that 52 test with their own test in 1961. If one dropped that Tsar Bomba, the strongest bomb ever tested on record, on the most populous city in the world as of right now, those 50 megatons of explosive force would instantly claim at least 11 million lives. And that bomb, the tested version of Tsar Bomba, was tested only half of its potential strength. One weapon, one place, one instant. If Oppenheimer was death, the hydrogen bomb was the invented God. How could such an omnibenevolent God not only create a world with such natural evils, but a world that could possibly create such man-made evils? Nothing compares to the power of a single hydrogen bomb in this world. Alright, so we've covered Leibniz now. We've kind of motivated this problem of evil. We've tried to give Leibniz some defense here, but not quite sufficiently a defense yet. But now I'm going to start putting my own twist on things. Consider now the rediscovered Gnostic myth, titled On the Origin of the World. Here I'll be paraphrasing and rearranging the text some, just for the sake of clarity. Now, when the Mother of God wanted to cause that without spirit to be formed into a likeness and rule over matter and all its powers, a ruler first appeared out of the abyss of darkness, lion-like in appearance, androgynous, with great authority in himself, but ignorant of whence he came into being. When the mother saw him moving in the depths, she spoke, "Youth, pass over here," which is understood as Yaldabaoth. Since that day, the first principle of logos that referred to the gods and angels and people has appeared, and the gods and angels and people constituted that which came into being by means of logos. But the rule of Yaldabaoth was ignorant of the power of the wise mother. He did not see her face, but he saw. Oh, sheesh. He did not see her face, but he saw in the abyss the likeness that spoke to him. There we go. Sorry, lost my place there. And from that voice he called himself Yaldabaoth. But the perfect ones call him Ariel because he was like a lion. After he came to possess authority over matter, the mother withdrew up into her light. After the heavens and their powers and all of their governments set themselves aright, the chief creator exalted himself as glorified by the army of angels. All the gods and their angels gave him praise and glory. And he rejoiced in his heart, and he boasted, saying to them, "I do not need anything. I am God, and there is no other God but me." And for that, his mother spoke of him as Samuel, the blind God. I should note real quick that some of those translations are a little funny, like the names. I also left the word logos untranslated, as the Greek meaning of logos is really vague and used in many different ways across like Greek philosophy and religion. So, I left that untranslated. That's a whole nother discussion of its own. That being said, you get the basic thrust of the myth. You have this divine feminine, this divine mother, who creates from the abyss of darkness, or the material, a false god, in some sense. A serpent god, or lion god, we'll talk more about that in a moment, who thinks of himself as the one true god, in large part because he doesn't recognize his own mother. He's the blind god, Samuel. Okay. So Leibniz. Leibniz was motivated by his core belief that God was our creator, and that our God and the creator were one and the same, and is an all-good being. What if that identity relation's what's off with Leibniz's argument? Consider in the book of Exodus, God speaks, "You must not worship any other gods except me. You must not make any idols. Don't make any statues or pictures of anything up in the sky or of anything on the earth or of anything down in the water. Don't worship or service idols of any kind, because I, the Lord, am your God. I hate my poor people worshiping other gods. People who sin against me become my enemies, and I will punish them. And I will punish their children and their grandchildren and even their great-grandchildren." Alternatively, you could translate, or some fragmentary differences, God spoke, "I am El and Kana, God and jealous, the jealous God." Elkanah. It's actually a conjunction of two ancient gods that came before the Jewish God as we know it today. Notice, however, this particular excerpt of both Exodus sounds quite a lot like the Gnostic creator god, the false creator god of the Gnostics, Yaldabaoth, or Samuel in the pejorative sense. Zealous, jealous, envious, and ultimately blind. One and the same to the Gnostics, the people who once were. Gnostics fine, but what of Leibniz? As I said, what if Leibniz was wrong about the relation to the creator of the material world and the creator which is all good? The Gnostic myth allows us to separate those two things. Right? You can have the divine feminine up in her light, away from the material world, who is indeed all good, but didn't create the material world as we, little beings of flesh, experience it. The false creator god, Yaldabaoth, is the separate creator god. A false god, ultimately, because it's not God in the sense of the supremely all-powerful being, but it's more like a devil. But a devil that's also the creator of the material world. There, we run into some really serious problems with Leibniz's argument. Again, Leibniz is accepting some form of Christian doctrine in the background here. But this is where I want to take concern. Let's talk a little bit more about the Gnostics. The Gnostics were, perhaps rightfully, purged from early Christianity for their beliefs. I don't think they're Christians. Take, for example, Book 3 of Irenaeus is against heresies, as the Gnostics were rejected quite decisively as rejecting the Gospels and the providence of the early church. For in the church, it is said in 1 Corinthians, God has set apostles, prophets, and teachers. and all the other means through which the Spirit works, of which all of those are not partakers who do not join themselves to the church, but defraud themselves of life through the perverse opinions and infamous behavior. For where the church is, there is the Spirit of God, and where the Spirit of God is, there is the church, and every kind of grace. But the Spirit is truth, that is the Holy Spirit. Those, therefore, who do not partake of him, the Creator, the Christian God, are neither nourished into life in the mother's breast, notice the invocation of the divine feminine there, nor do they enjoy the most limpid fountain which issues from the body of Christ, that is the Eucharist, the sharing of the blood and the bread. But they dig for themselves broken cisterns out of earthly trenches, and drink putrid water out of the mire, fleeing from the faith of the church lest they be convinced, and rejecting the Spirit that they may not be instructed. As I said, I think people could think of like the Gnostics as like these Christians that never were, or some dirty secret the Christians don't want you to know. They're explicitly anti-Christian. Like this religious view of the world is fundamentally at odds with Christianity as we understand it today. It'd be satanic to think what they think, as I already invoked earlier, and they're explicitly called that by Irenaeus later on in that same text, in Book 5. I'll read again. Let the Gnostics be recognized as agents of Satan by all those who worship God, through whose agency Satan now, and not before, has been seen to speak against God, even him who has prepared eternal fire for every kind of apostasy. For he did not venture to blaspheme the Lord openly of himself, as also in the beginning he led man astray through the instrumentality of the serpent, concealing himself as it were from God, just as it is with those who break the laws. When punishment overtakes them, they throw the blame upon those who frame the laws, but not upon themselves. In like manner do those men, filled with a satanic spirit, bring innumerable accusations against our Creator, right? This view of the Creator as some kind of deceiver, who has given us both the Spirit of life and established a law adapted for all, the commandments primarily, and they will not admit the judgment of God is just. Wherefore also they set about imagining some other Father who neither cares about nor exercises a providence over our affairs, nay, one who even approves of all sins. Remember that last line for a minute. All right. So the Gnostics paint this really grim picture in their creation myth, right? There's a terror in all of the material world, right? Leibniz, in some senses, turned on his head with the Gnostics. Take the story of the Garden of Eden. Take the story of the Garden of Eden as an example. It's completely reversed, right? The Creator, jealous of the capabilities of the human spirit, this immaterial stuff, denies them the fruit of knowledge. They rebel in search of light. The mother for the Gnostics is this divine light that's beyond the material world. And this is what sets the Creator God into a rage. Remember that one line that I said earlier, one who approves of all sins. Well, consider what Leibniz says in section 204 of his Theodicy. Thus I, Leibniz, shall say that God, by virtue of his supreme goodness, has in a beginning a serious inclination to see or cause to be produced all good and every laudable action, and to prevent or to see and cause to fail all evil and every bad action. But he is determined by the same goodness, unified to an infinite wisdom, and by the very concourse of all the previous and particular inclinations toward a good goal, and toward the preventing of each evil, to produce the best possible design of all things. This is his final and decretatory will, and this design of the best being of such a nature that the good must be enhanced therein, as light is enhanced by shade. By some evil, which is incomparably less than this good, God could not have excluded this evil, nor introduced certain goods that were excluded from this plan, without wronging his supreme perfection. So for that reason, one must say that he permitted the sins of others, because otherwise he would have performed an action worse than the sin of all creatures. Worse than the sin of all creatures. The similarity of that phrasing is very striking compared to the Irenaeus earlier, one who even approves of all sins. That's it's just quite striking. It's hard to really see past it once you see that interesting similarity. Right? If we accept this Christian view of creation, Leibniz's optimism is somewhat justified. We can quibble about it within the context of Christianity, at least. But if we take a step back from just the Christian worldview, we reach something quite striking. Leibniz was by no means a Gnostic, but there's quite some distance between the Christian worldview versus, say, the Gnostic worldview, or just other views of the world that happen to line up with the Gnostic worldview. Is a God so good that he would allow the evils we have so discussed? Right? I mean, I don't know what's more terrifying to me. Whether we do indeed have this kind of great, all-powerful, all-good God, the Christian God, who nonetheless created a world with evil in it, and it could not have been any other way. Or just a world in which, like, there's a bad creator God and another God above that God, and we are just kind of stuck with bad things in our lives. I think the Christian worldview, in some sick, twisted way, is scarier, right? Even the Christian God could not have created a world which was better than this one. That scares me more than the Gnostic myth, right? I don't think we should fear the possibility that some inferior, jealous God is the one who created the material world. I fear the all-powerful God who, even in all power and all goodness, could not have done otherwise. I don't fear the dark. I think I fear the light. So yeah, that's all I got. I guess this is where you say like, comment, and subscribe. This is going to be my first of, I think, 5 demos I have planned, so hope y'all enjoyed.